Hi guys, have you ever watched a review by a pilot on really what happens in airplanes that we see in most Hollywood films? So, uh, so this guy is actually a pilot, and he really differentiates between what really what happens with planes and what they say in the Hollywood movies. So that is so interesting, right? So it is very unique, different one. And to see such kind of reactions on different very unique kind of stuff, I try to bring it all this content to you. Thanks for watching with me here in Red Loops Reactions. Let's see what's there, and it's so interesting. So here he is actually reacting on Air Force One movie. What really, how much they have exaggerated really what happens, actually this flight sequence and all that, really these things happen the way that they show us. So let's see.
The movie Air Force One came out in 1997. It's a film where terrorists take over the US president's Boeing 747. Today I'm going to do a Hollywood versus reality on the film Air Force One.
Get off my plane.
Guys, I think most of us of our age should have actually watched this movie many times, and I have actually watched this movie many times. If you have not watched it, it is a great movie. You can go and watch it. Like, no, it is a nice movie actually. So the reaction is on that movie, right? Let's see.
Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel 7-4 Gear is all about aviation.
Do subscribe.
Today I'm here in Anchorage, Alaska. As you can see, the backdrop of this video is actually really nice. Now I want to be clear, I've never been on Air Force One, so there's a few assumptions that I'm going to have to make on a couple of topics. One thing you should know is the Boeing 747 that the president currently flies on is referred to as a classic. It's an older generation, an older model than what you see me flying. That means it requires 3 people on the flight deck. You have a captain, a co-pilot, or a first officer, and an engineer. So the first scene, you're going to see 3 people up there, and that third person is actually required to be there on the flight deck to fly that aircraft. The first scene I had, the terrorists are actually already on board Air Force One and are in the process of trying to take over the aircraft. Let's get into it.
Code red, we have a code red. Shots fired on board.
Flight code red acknowledged. Bridges lock that door now. Flight control, this is Air Force One declaring emergency. Get down! Ramstein Tower, this is Air Force One.
We are code red. Shots fired on board. Request emergency assistance. ETA 15 minutes.
Air Force One, landing runway 09. I repeat, runway 09.
Roger. Turning to heading 185, descending to 5,000 feet.
Halo Flight Lead, you are now under escort. All airspace has been cleared. Alert force has been mobilized.
Ramstein Tower, we are 10 miles north of the final coming in. Read out.
Roger, Air Force One, wing is 090 at 12. You are clear to land.
In this first scene, the main thing that is off is how the pilots and air traffic control are communicating. Even in an emergency, air traffic control is going to be giving the pilots a heading and a direction and an altitude. The pilots generally aren't going to be dictating, I'm turning this heading and I'm going to this altitude. That's generally not what's going to happen. Another thing the pilot says is that he's on a 10-mile dogleg.
Ramstein Tower, we are 10 miles north of the final coming in. Read out.
A dogleg means you're coming in at a 45-degree angle to the angle of the runway. In most cases, we intercept on a 90-degree angle, that's called a base leg, or we're on a very long final, which means we're just coming in straight to the runway. So a dogleg means you're coming in at a 45-degree angle. Another thing that he says is they're coming in red hot. I started laughing because no pilot would ever say that. And if someone said that, all the other people would be making fun of them. All right, let's get back to the movie.
This aircraft, is it understood? Flaps 30. Flaps 30.
Let me pause it here real quick, because he says he's going to land flaps 30. And there's nothing wrong with that. We land either flaps 25 or flaps 30. But you're not going to have someone select flaps 30 this close to the runway. Usually you're going to land flaps 30 if you're very heavy or you're on a short runway and you need to come on slower. You would land flaps 25 probably in this scenario because you're trying to land and get on the ground as quickly as possible. So selecting flaps 30 this close to the runway is not very realistic. Also, I mentioned earlier, Air Force One is a Boeing 747, which is a classic.
I'll tell you something, like, what is this flaps 30, flaps 20 and all that? Flaps is kind of, you would see in the wings. Okay, so there is kind of, you have that, the ankle in which, like, they move it, like, to push this wings. So that is what they say as flaps and flaps 30 or flaps 20. So that has a lot of control over the aircraft, and so that is what he's actually mentioning too. So
Classic edition means that the gauges, the instruments that the pilot's looking at, are round steam gauges. They're not the glass cockpit, which is the computer screens that you're seeing here. Now, it's possible they've upgraded the avionics or upgraded the instrumentation in the Boeing 747, but an original classic that you generally hear people refer to doesn't have this layout of a cockpit. And like I said, I've never been on Air Force One, but if there's someone out there that's watching that can get me a tour, all right, let's get back to the movie. Now, right before he shoots the first officer, the first officer reaches over and grabs a lever and pulls it down. That lever, if it's armed, which it usually is right before landing, it automatically deploys. So there's no reason that the first officer would need to pull that. Usually that's something that's going to be armed, and as soon as the wheels touch down, that speed brake is going to come back. That's going to help push the aircraft onto the ground. That's going to help reduce lift on the wings. That's going to help the brakes. There's a bunch of different things that it does. If someone actually forgot to do it, which I guess is possible in this emergency situation, it's natural that the pilots are going to look for that to come back, which means in this case the captain would reach over and pull that speed lever back, so it wouldn't be up. Also realize that the Boeing 747 has auto brakes. That means as soon as those wheels touch down and speed up, the brakes start working and slowing the aircraft down. The pilots aren't manually doing it. So you see the brakes skidding and things like that. The brakes won't do that. They'll actually release and make sure that they have traction. Another thing that's very Hollywood in this scene is you see the pilot actually slump over and then the plane veers to the right. This isn't a car. It's not like a normal steering wheel that if somebody lets go, it's going to shoot one way or the other. The way the aircraft is maneuvered is either using your feet on the rudder pedals and using rudder steering like that, or a tiller. This is a picture of the tiller in a 747. It takes a little bit of force to move this, so a guy slumping over in his seat isn't going to be close enough to reach that tiller, and there's not going to be enough force to push it. Also, I hopefully don't need to tell you that a 747 can't turn at this speed. We're generally turning around 7 to 10 knots when we're making a turn. It's not a Fast and Furious car which you can drift around a corner. Sorry, Vin. Alright, let's get back to the movie. First, I'm not sure why everyone in Hollywood likes to think that the leading edge of an aircraft wing is sharp, like razor sharp with hedge trimmers on the front. Every time you see a plane wing go through a bush or a tree in a movie, it just slices everything off. Here's a picture that I actually pulled from my Instagram that shows the leading edge of a wing from a 747. As you can see, it's a rounded front. There's no hedges or razor sharp anything on the front of this wing. So it would not work. Going through there, it would not just slice off a bunch of branches. And when he finally turns to actually take the aircraft off, there's several really Hollywood things that are going on here. First, and I couldn't quite make it out, but it doesn't look like he has any flaps out. When you take off a 747, normally you're taking off with flaps 10 or flaps 20, and that allows the aircraft to take off at a slower speed. That's the reason we use it for landing as well, so we can land at a slower speed. So it's the same for takeoff. You're going to have those flaps out so you can get the aircraft up in the air. And he's also taking off in a very short distance, which means without any flaps, there's no way he's going to get off the ground in a couple thousand feet like you're seeing here. And the last thing, and I can't stress this enough, is no matter what type of constipated face that you make, your aircraft isn't going to perform any better or do anything that it's not normally going to be able to do. So if we're ever flying together and I look over and you're making a face like this, please don't do that. Alright, let's get back to the movie. In this scene, Harrison Ford is actually taking over the plane and actually going to be flying the aircraft.
I suppose you know how to fly.
No, sir.
Come along, Major. I'll need a co-pilot.
Yes, sir. Anybody there?
Yes, we're here, sir.
All right, you got somebody that can help us fly this thing?
Sir, this is Colonel Jackson.
Wow.
We need to get you out of hostile territory.
Good idea, Bob.
I need for you to look above the central video screen. There's a series of LED numbers. Now, one of them should read 110.
Got it.
That's your course heading. Now, just below, there's a knob surrounded by hash marks. I want you to turn that knob counterclockwise to 290.
290. We're turning, Bob.
Good. This course will take you out of Kazakhstan.
Okay, baby.
Now, sir, we can't land this plane on autopilot, so we're going to need to go over a few things.
Now this scene kind of surprised me because Harrison Ford in real life is actually a pilot, yet he's talking without holding any buttons down. Now you can make a phone call and talk to someone through the flight deck, that can happen, but usually when you're talking, you're transmitting, you're holding a button down, and his hands are moving around, he's not holding a button down, so as a pilot, you would think that that's something he would have done. If everything that we said on the flight deck was getting transmitted to other aircraft or air traffic control or passengers in the back, most pilots by now would probably be fired. And as a side note, it's kind of funny they said they wanted to get out of Kazakhstan. Just a couple weeks ago, I actually had a layover in Kazakhstan. Here you can see is a picture I took on the ramp with a 747 right behind me, and behind it are the mountains of Kazakhstan. I just took it off my Instagram. Anyway, let's get back to the movie.
Snakes, how far away are they? Never mind.
Got one coming at us. Countermeasures are activated.
That's right. Chris, we're in fire. Got an engine on fire. Number 4 engine is on fire.
Hold the fire handle. Overhead. Okay, I got it. I got it.
That's right. Rolling right.
Left rudder. You have to compensate.
Pull back on number 1 engine.
Negative. Slow down. You have to trim it out.
How do I do that?
Knob. Aft pedestal. Jesus Christ.
Got a red light here. Looks like we're losing fuel.
So we'll just have to ignore the fact that all these fighter jets are not able to shoot down a 747, despite the fact that there are no other guns or weapons or missiles for the 747 to shoot back at these other fighter jets, which are significantly faster. Now, one thing that was very good is that when the engine was on fire, the co-pilot in this scenario reached up and pulled the lever and turned it. That is what you would do in the real event of an engine fire, so that was correct. Harrison also asked him if he could pull back engine number 1. Now, we don't know what altitude or what speed they're at, but that would be another way to balance the aircraft out. But he tells him to use the trim, and where he tells him to get the trim rudder is actually in the right spot. It's on that aft pedestal, kind of to the right of where he is. And again, I don't know what altitude or what speed he's at, but he could have pulled back lever 1. Because obviously these fighter jets can't shoot, and they'll probably run out of bullets and have to go back and get gas. Okay, let's get back to the movie.
Air Force One, this is Liberty 2-4. Approach on your left side. You read.
Air Force One, loud and clear.
Gibbs, we're here. Get the door.
Facility 10,000 feet, 200 knots.
Gotta get her slowed down.
Air Force One, Liberty 2-4. This is AWACS Blue Star. We have you in radar contact.
Okay, I just have to pause this real quick. Obviously, most of you know that aircraft like a 747 are pressurized. And when it's pressurized, it's not like you can just open the door latch and then punch it and it will fly out. The little door that you see him actually opening up is just the panel to arm the emergency slide. It's not like you can lift that panel up and then just punch that yellow knob and the door is going to go flying off. All that you would do is punch it and probably hurt your hand. Besides that, if they were able to punch and kick that door, which is very big and heavy, is either going to fly into the wing and damage it, or possibly into the engine. There's a bunch of things that could go really wrong with kicking that door open. A better idea would have been using the hatch that's on the flight deck. It's a small hatch that opens inward. That inward hatch would then be inside the aircraft and not flying into the wings or engines. That would obviously make the flight deck very loud and very windy. But since these guys have already avoided a hostage takeover from terrorists, missiles, fighter jets that couldn't shoot them down, a little bit of noise from the flight deck isn't going to really ruin their day. Okay, let's get back to the movie.
He's lost another engine.
Liberty, we just lost another engine.
Liberty 2-4 acknowledged. Sir, time to go.
Who's gonna fly the plane?
I'll take care of that, sir. Got it. We've lost another engine.
We're passing 3,000 feet. Impact in less than 2 minutes. Get the president out of there.
When you see engine 1 flame out, the screen they show there is accurate. That's what it looks like on a 400, which is what I fly. But you see the engine 4 shut down, and then you see some instrumentation around engine 4. That is not actually how it would look like. It would look like this if the engine was shut down. Next, when you see the military guy arrive onto the aircraft, Harrison Ford is getting out and he's squeezing around the outside of the seat. There's not a lot of space over there. This is a photo of what it looks like from behind the captain's seat on a 747. There's not a lot of space that someone's going to be able to slide past there, especially not a full-grown man. And again, a 747 is not a car, so you can't just hook a seatbelt to it and hold it in place. The more realistic option would be trim the aircraft out and then try to run off the aircraft. Or hopefully you opened that hatch and went through the hatch door like I talked about earlier. But you're not going to be able to get a yoke to get held by a seatbelt and hope that's going to do it. That is never going to work. If they'd done my hatch idea, he honestly could have been flying it until the last second, and then you could get out of that hatch probably in 5 or 10 seconds, so it wouldn't really matter at that point. Alright, let's go over the final scene of Air Force One, where they've gotten almost everyone off the aircraft. Now, if this movie was made now, they could have just lowered Sully in through that escape hatch that I was talking about, and then he could have smoothly landed on the water and everything would have been saved. Speaking of Sully, if you haven't seen the Hollywood vs. Reality that I did on his movie, I'll put it right up here. I talk about the great job that Sully...
Yeah, so this was the reaction on that, and there's a lot of information, right? There's a lot of information of how much exaggeration Hollywood actually do, and he has actually done a great, very great. I'll really say a lot of information being shared, a great job, and seriously, there's a lot of things that I get to know about what really happens in flight. So it's a good one, right? So more like these videos I would keep reacting to. I just would like to know about your thoughts on this. Thanks for watching with me.